Raven Software released a sequel to their 1994 title, Heretic. This is called Hexen and was released in 1995. The game engine adds additional features of the modified Doom engine used in the previous game. Following the defeat of Desparal and Heretic, Hexen takes place in Chronos, where Korax, the second of the Serpent Riders, is residing. 3 heroes are called upon to destroy him, and you choose one of them at the beginning of the game. These 3 heroes represent 3 different classes you can choose from, each with unique weapons and a different playstyle. The fighter is the strongest of the 3, relying primarily on melee weapons to deal damage. The cleric is more of an all-around class with a diverse set of weapons. The mage is the most fragile of the 3, relying on long-range magic attacks that can hit multiple enemies. The class system maintains the pure FPS formula of acquiring weapons and ammo to make your character stronger, so you won't be worrying about character stats or other RPG elements. Hexen breaks away from the traditional start-to-finish level progression and moves towards a system of hubs. Players will travel back and forth between levels, with a central hub connecting each level. Some keys and switches in one level are used to open doors in another. Ultimately, you are required to solve multi-level puzzles in order to progress to the next hub, but many of these puzzles can be solved in a non-linear fashion. The weapon system was unconventional for its time. Rather than a standard set of weapons taking up the entire row of numbers on a keyboard, you have 4 weapons which depend on the class you choose. The fighter has an array of enchanted melee weapons, while the mage takes advantage of spells. The blue and green mana you come across function as the ammunition for these weapons. Every class also has their own super weapon, which deals huge amounts of damage in a short period of time, but consumes large amounts of mana with each attack. Aside from these weapons, you can use several items to help you along, flechettes and quartz flasks being the most common. Quartz flasks heal 25 health, plain and simple. The flechettes are very useful and function based on your class. The fighter will throw them like grenades, giving him that much-needed ranged attack earlier on. The cleric creates poison gas in an area, useful as a temporary blockade to hold back swarms of enemies. The mage uses them as time bombs for when you need to do extra damage. Discs of repulsion push back nearby enemies. They're useful with the mage class because of his low armor, but they're most useful when you're trapped in a corner. My personal favorite is the Porculator, not just because of its name, but because it turns multiple enemies into pigs which you can easily kill off. The biggest problem with using these items are the controls. Like with Heretic, you can only use the Enter key to use items. The default keys feel somewhat okay with using items, but you give up a lot of control compared to a WASD configuration. On the other hand, the WASD configuration make it difficult to use items during combat. It would be so much easier if these actions were user configurable. Many of the monsters in Hexen present a different challenge to the player and require a different strategy depending on your class. Ettins are encountered throughout the entire game and occasionally appear in large numbers. The fighter can easily hold them off at a small choke point with Timon's axe, and the mage can use the Sapphire wand to damage multiple enemies in a straight line. Centaurs have a shield that can deflect projectile attacks back towards you. The cleric would have to use flechettes to take care of them, while the mage can easily dispatch them with the Arc of Death. The level design tends to be very confusing at times. It's uncommon to see any indication of where to go. Some doors require more than one switch to be activated before it opens, and you rarely see any message telling you this, leading you to wander off, hoping to stumble upon the required switch. There's also a problem with many of the death traps. A lot of times, there's no indication of their existence. For almost every single trap, you will die the first time around. If you want to get through the entire game, there's 2 things you can do. Either spend several hours looking for that obscure switch, or do something I prefer not to do. Look up a walkthrough online and follow it. This is the game's biggest flaw. The level design definitely should have been less confusing and less frustrating. On the other hand, the environments you come across make great use of dark colors and low lighting conditions to generate an atmosphere where chaos and evil rule the land. Hexen features several enhancements to the Doom engine that make this all possible. Fog effects and dynamic lighting are used to great effect. Moving sectors are used to create crushing wall traps and creaking chapel doors. Additional objects complete the look and feel of the environments, ranging from decorative church torches and candles, to the rocks and withering trees of those swamps and barren wastelands, to the hanging corpses of those tortured to death. To top it off, the sound effects make these environments come to life, whether it's the wind blowing in the background, or the sound of frogs croaking in the swamplands. That's just outside of combat. During combat, the audio combines very well with what you see. There's just something about the sound of weapons on flesh and the monsters dying that just sounds so satisfying. Like with all games that ran under the Doom engine, Hexen had a meaty soundtrack that does a great job of establishing the mood. Rather than an upbeat soundtrack, the music is more ambient and slow-paced, which contributes to the creepiness of the environment. Death Kings of the Dark Citadel is the official expansion pack for Hexen and was released in 1996. It features 20 new single-player levels divided into 3 hubs. It was around this time that expansion packs for games began increasing their presence in retail stores. Of course, before considering the purchase of the game, trying it out first is always recommended. The demo consists of the first 4 levels. Although you have all 3 classes available, I thought it was too short. There's not enough content to properly demonstrate the hub system, and not enough enemies to try out your second weapon when you acquire it. This is probably a non-issue if you're a console gamer, because you have the chance to rent the game. Hexen was ported to the Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, and Nintendo 64 in 1997. These were straight ports that retained the overall delivery of the PC version, but the limitations of the consoles had to be considered. The PlayStation version naturally had to run at a lower frame rate. Much of the level's architecture was simplified, and only included front-facing sprites of the enemies. This version was single-player only. The Saturn version shares the same limitations of the PlayStation port, but is played at a higher frame rate. The Nintendo 64 version is considered the most accurate port of Hexen. It retains all the graphical quality of the PC version, and takes advantage of the texture filtering features available to the console. It also features 4-player deathmatch and co-op modes, so you can hook up 4 controllers and have a frag fest with your buddies. In early 1999, the source code for Heretic and Hexen was released. This allowed fans to create a new engine to run the game on. One of them is the cross-platform Doomsday engine for Linux and other modern operating systems. It took advantage of OpenGL to render each level as a true 3D environment, complete with texture filtering and smooth frame rates. Controls can be changed at will to take advantage of modern hardware, such as gaming mice and keyboards. Optional resource packs are available that provide high-resolution textures and replace the 2D sprites with 3D models. In the end, I have mixed feelings about this one. On one hand, it has unique weapons and a non-linear approach to the single-player mode. On the other hand, the confusing level design make it difficult to play without a walkthrough, and the demo never properly showed off the game. By no means is it a bad game, but it can be a very frustrating one, especially when you play the first time around. Hexen is available on Steam as part of the id Super Pack. If you're a fan of Doom or its so-called clones, you might as well pick it up, along with a lot of other great games.
Worship me, and I may yet be merciful. Then again, maybe not.